This week's Parsha is Parsha Tsav, which is the 25th Parsha of the Torah, and it is the second Torah portion in the book of Vayikra, which is the third book of the Torah. And this week's Parsha begins with the daily offering that the Kohanim, the priests, would bring in the tabernacle. And prior to bringing this offering, the offering was a lamb, prior to that, they would remove some of the ashes from the previous day and then add wood in order to keep the fire burning continuously. That was something that Hashem commanded the Kohanim to do as part of the service, was to keep this fire burning continually, that it should never extinguish. So they had to add fire, but each day they would remove a little bit of the ashes from the previous day first. And it was kind of to show that it's a continuation. We served Hashem the day before. We didn't remove the ashes that night. We left them for the next day because just as we served Hashem the day before, we're going to be serving Hashem today. And so that's kind of like a nice reminder that, yes, while each day brings a new opportunity and new time to improve ourselves and to better ourselves, we are sort of continuing in our journey from the previous days, that our past is what brought us to today, and that we shouldn't completely forget our past, but we should use it to propel us into the future, to improve ourselves, to continue in this day's service. And I thought that was a really nice concept. And then moving on in the Parsha, we go over some of the other offerings, and then towards the end of the Parsha, we have the inauguration of the tabernacle and the inauguration of the Kohanim. So now everything is built, the tabernacle is finished, it's ready to be used for service by the Jewish people. And the Kohanim, Aaron, who is Moses' brother, and his sons are ready to take their position as Kohanim, as the priests over the Jewish people. The Kohanim have to go through this inauguration process, which Moses performs for them, where they put on, all of the Jewish people gather around the tabernacle, which is incredible that this sort of relatively small building, and the some 600,000 some Jewish people were able to gather around this building, and they all came there to watch this inauguration process of the Kohanim. So the Kohanim had to put on their special garments, which we've talked about in previous weeks in the Parshas. They put on their special garments. Moses anointed them with oil. They had an immersion in a mikveh, and then they brought a lot of inauguration offerings to Hashem, and then finally they had like this big meal, and for 7 days they would gather by the tabernacle until the end of the 7th day, the beginning of the 8th day, when they would be able to start their service in the tabernacle, their job. And it was the same thing in a sense for the objects inside of the tabernacle. Moses anointed them with oil. The offerings were brought on to the altar and the fire for the first time. And then at the end of the Parsha, now everything is ready. The inauguration has been complete, and the tabernacle is ready to be used. And what's really amazing to me, again, is going back a little bit, how all of the Jewish people gathered. All of the Jewish people gathered around to see this, to see the tabernacle being ready to be used. And oftentimes, we work on something for a long time. We have long-term projects, whether those are fitness goals or whether those are goals in our workplace, goals in our families. And they're not things that you can do in a day. They're things that take time. Building the tabernacle took time. It took people who were skilled to build it. It took resources given by the Jewish people. It took just the inauguration process of the tabernacle and of the Kohanim was 7 days long. And the teaching over of the laws, all of it took time. And in our lives, we often have things that take time. Again, I was talking about those different goals that we might have that take time. But finally, when they complete it, when they have ready to inaugurate the temple, all of the Jewish people gathered, and it was a big celebration. And so when we reach our goals, we should celebrate them. We should recognize them as accomplishments and as great things that we did, and we should share it with people. Not in a haughty way, not in a like, oh, look what I did, but in a sense of recognizing your accomplishments, recognizing things that you've worked hard for that have come to fruition, and appreciating that and recognizing that with those who are important to you and your family and your community, whatnot. This week is also Shabbat Hagadol, or the Great Sabbath, which is the Shabbat immediately preceding Passover. And for Shabbat Hagadol, usually there is a big sermon given by the rabbi in synagogue. That could be one reason it's called the Great Shabbat, or it's great because when we were in Egypt on this day, it's when the Jewish people, they tied lambs, which was an Egyptian deity, to their bedposts, and they tied the lambs to their bedposts, and the Egyptians couldn't do anything about it. The Egyptians were really, really powerless. Here, the Jews were preparing to slaughter the Egyptian deity, which was a lamb, and the Egyptians couldn't do anything about it. It was a big miracle. This was just 5 days before the Jewish people left the land of Egypt. So it could be because of the greatness of the miracle that happened on this day, all of those years ago. Or another interpretation is the Haftorah that we read this week is about the coming of the Messiah, and it says that it will be a great day when he comes. So those are some different interpretations of why it is a great Shabbat, but I think a lot of people have a custom, for example, of reading the Haggadah, the book that we use to go through the Passover Seder. A lot of people have the habit, or the tradition, I guess, rather than habit, of reading it ahead of time on Shabbat. They read it on Shabbat in preparation for the Seder that is coming up in the week ahead, just to familiarize themselves with it, to prepare themselves for it, maybe to develop some ideas that they wanted to share at the Seder. And so that's a nice thing that we can do in order to elevate our Shabbat and elevate our Seders, is to take some time to read the Haggadah, to formulate our ideas, to be ready to share them at the Passover Seder next week. I hope you all have a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom.